So my friend Jeff, he's the kind of guy that you love to hate. And I'm not talking about you, Jeffrey. It's a different Jeff that I've known for a very long time. But he's the kind of person that you just love to hate him. And I know that all of us in this room know this kind of person, because he's the kind of guy that he's just so positive that no matter what, it just kind of gets on your nerves after a while. And no matter what happens, he's always in a good mood, and he always has something positive to say. In fact, if you ask Jeff how he's doing, he'll actually look at you and say, "I'm better than yesterday and not as good as I plan to be tomorrow." I mean, this guy is unity through and through. But one day after watching him, he's such a motivational person. And if somebody comes up to him and they start complaining, Jeff will find the silver lining in what it is that they're complaining about. And so one day I asked him, just, how do you do it? How are you always so positive all of the time? And he told me that the way he sees it, every time when he wakes up in the morning, he has two choices. He can choose to be in a good mood, or he can choose to be in a bad mood. And if something bad happens to him throughout the day, he can choose to be a victim, or he can choose to learn from his experience. And so he said, I always choose to learn. And if someone comes up to me and starts complaining, he said, I figure I can choose to kind of buy into the complaining and reinforce it and go along with it, or I can choose to find something positive to share with them from their day. So that's all I do. That's how I do it. I kind of looked at him and I said, you're kidding me. It's just not that easy. You can't just wake up and say, oh, it's going to be a good day, and it just works out that well. And he said, no, really, it is. See, Jeff said that life is all about choices. And when you cut away all of the clutter and all of the rest of the stuff that we put on it, you get to choose how you react. You get to choose how your friends are going to affect you. And your attitude is your choice. And so I started thinking about that. I mean, is your attitude really your choice? Because I'm going to tell you right now, there have been times in my life where it certainly didn't feel like my attitude was my choice. It felt very much like it was the choice of the people out there that were doing the things to me that put me in the bad mood to begin with. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, we really do have a choice when it comes to this stuff. And so I did what any good Unity Truth student would do. I went and got out my Fillmore resources and started looking through those and seeing what I could find about this idea of choosing my own reality and choosing my attitude. And interestingly enough, I found something that just kind of made sense to me in Charles Fillmore's definitions of heaven and hell. You see, when Charles Fillmore was writing about heaven, what he wrote was that it was a state of consciousness in harmony with the thoughts of God. So that told me a few things. The idea that it was a state of consciousness told me that it was something that I could choose to be in. And since it was a state of consciousness that was in harmony with the thoughts of God, it was something that I didn't really have to wait to get to. I could choose to be in that state of consciousness and that state of heaven right now. And it had to do with the thoughts that I was thinking. And so I continued to look. And kind of continued to look around and see what I could find. And in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, under Charles' definition for hell, he wrote that one does not have to die in order to go to hell any more than one has to die to go to heaven. Both are states of mind and conditions which people experience as a direct outworking of their thoughts, beliefs, words, and acts. If one's mental processes are out of harmony with the law of man's being, they result in trouble and sorrow, mental as well as bodily anguish overtakes one, and this is hell. But the part of this that really stood out for me was this part where he writes that both are states of mind and conditions, which people experience as direct outworking of their thoughts, beliefs, words, and acts. So it's a condition that we can experience based off of how we think about it. And the more I started thinking, the more I realized that there were definitely times in my life when I'd put myself in hell, and it was my own choosing. That I did it because it felt like things were so negative around me that I couldn't see the presence of God in it. And as my thoughts continued, the worse it got. And so the more I thought about it, the more I realized that anytime we make the choice to focus on the negative things that are occurring around us, when we choose to see those instead of the positive things, that we've made a conscious choice to put ourselves in that hell state of mind. But if we do the opposite, if we focus on the things that are good in our life, the abundance that we have, the peace, the love, that joy that surrounds us, then that's when we've put ourselves in that heaven state of consciousness. And so the more I started thinking about this, the more it became very clear to me that this was a choice that I could make in any and every moment. Now, what I realized was that just like Jeff every morning, who wakes up and says, today's going to be a good day, that every morning when I would wake up, I had a choice to make. That I could wake up and say, I'm going to choose to see the power and presence of God in my life today. I'm going to choose to live from a place where I see the love and the joy that's around me today. And that choosing to live from that place was putting me into a heaven state of consciousness. But that's real easy to do when things are going well. It's real easy for me to wake up and say, things are going to be great today. It's going to be a good day when things are going well. But what do we do when the rough times? What do we do when we don't feel like we're in that heaven state of mind? How do we get through that? Because let's be honest, life has its challenges that we're all going to face. There's no getting around those. So how do we move from being in that hell state to being into a heaven state? Well, ultimately, it all comes down to the choices that we make. You see, unity teaches us that our thoughts help create our reality, and that the thoughts that we hold help determine the reality that we experience. So the thoughts that we hold of negativity begin to create more of those negative thoughts. So really, ultimately, it all comes down to the thoughts that we have and the thoughts that we're holding about a situation. It's all about how we choose to see the situation that we're in. But you see, we always have the choice. We have the choice to express gratitude for the time we got to spend with a loved one whom we've lost. We have a choice to learn from something where we failed or maybe didn't live up to our highest standard. We have the choice to choose how the experience that we had gets to shape our lives. The experience doesn't get to shape us. We get to choose that. Now, I want you to be very clear in understanding me. That this is not me telling you that it's not okay to grieve. This is not me telling you that it's not okay to feel emotions about something that has happened to you. That's beyond okay. In fact, that's a normal part of the healing process. But what you get to choose is how that experience is going to affect your life. Go through the grieving process. Please go through the grieving process. But know that you don't have to suffer just to suffer. You can choose something better. You see, even in the face of tragedy and disaster, we still have a choice. We have the choice to show up and to be the very presence of God for the people who need us to be that presence. And we have the choice to learn from the mistakes and to make a different future and to make a better future. Or we have the other choice. The choice where we can let the tragedy drag us down and throw us into that repeating trap of negativity. The choice is always ours. We can choose to learn to grow and acknowledge that God is still in charge, or we can choose to get sucked into the appearance of what is. Now, I know that there are likely a few of you out here right now who are going through your own hell state of consciousness. I know there have been times in my life where I certainly was too. And so what I'm going to do is, there are 5 things that I learned that were helpful for me when I was moving out of that hell state into a heaven state of mind. And so I'd like to share them with you. And even if everything's going well for you and you're in that heaven state of mind right now, I would encourage you to maybe go ahead and write these down anyway. Because here's the thing, life changes. And you never know how life is going to change and how it might affect you. But these were 5 things that were very helpful for me when I was going through a time when I was telling myself I wasn't enough. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't good enough. I didn't have the kind of relationship that I wanted to have in my life. And as I started to put these things into practice, what I saw was actually the shift from a time when I felt like I was almost being persecuted and I was never going to be good enough, to a time where I knew I was the presence of God and I had all I needed in every situation. So the first thing that I realized that I needed to do was I needed to take responsibility for my own feelings. That I'm the architect of my own happiness. No one out there can give it to me. There's no thing I can go get. There's no amount of stuff that I can acquire that will give me happiness. There's no relationship that will make me happy. I and I alone am the only one that gets to decide how I feel about a situation. The next thing I realized was how important it was for me to be in the here and now and to focus on the present. You see, what I came to know was that yesterday had already happened. It was gone. And tomorrow hadn't happened yet. And so there was no sense in worrying about that. But what I needed to do was focus on what was right here before me and the blessings and the wonderful things that were happening in this moment. You see, I could spend all my time worrying about what I should have said, or the cute girl I saw at the restaurant that I could have gone up and talked to and maybe got myself out of that relationship thing I was worried about. Or I could spend my time focusing on where I am right now and what's happening around me. It seemed to work out a lot better when I was focused on the here and now than when I was worrying about what was coming up at work on Friday. The third realization that I had was that I had to surrender to what is. You see, the challenges, the things that were appearing before me, were just things that were appearing before me for me to work with, and however I chose to work with them. I had to surrender myself to just being in the moment with those things. The way Eckhart Tolle says this, as he writes, that the primary cause of unhappiness is never the situation, but your thoughts about it. Similarly, our Buddhist friends would say that the wisdom teaches us that all situations are neutral. It's our label that we put on them that makes them either good or bad, positive or negative. And so I had to realize that everything that was coming to me was really neutral. It was up to me to make the decision how I was going to let that experience and inform my life. It wasn't up to the situation that appeared before me. I got to be in charge of that. The fourth thing I realized was that I had to stop that stupid hamster wheel from running around in my mind. You all know what the hamster wheel is, right? So you get one negative thought that starts in your mind. Like for me, it might have been, I'm not good enough to get this promotion. And then just like that hamster that gets on the wheel and starts running and running and running and running, that thought starts running through your head. And usually other thoughts start showing up. And interestingly enough, just like the hamster, it loves to do this at about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. It really starts running fast. And we know that the thoughts that we're holding help create the reality that we're experiencing. So guess what? If I'm sitting here saying, well, I'm not good enough to get this promotion, I start to believe it. So eventually what I learned to do was the moments when I would catch myself saying those things, and just replace that thought with an affirmation. So if I'm telling myself I'm just not good enough to get this promotion, well, I just kind of stop and say, well, no, I am good enough. I'm the presence of the Christ. I'm more than enough in any situation. And slowly but surely, the hamster wheel kind of stops running. It's not really something you can just turn off like a light switch, but it slows down and stops running. And the last thing that I realized was so very important for me was that I had to get out of my head and get out and engage in the world around me. You see, when we're going through a time where we're really kind of down on ourselves and really introspective, we don't want to be around people. We want to just kind of close ourselves up in our little cave and just stay there with our thoughts. But what I found really helped me was to go out and engage with the world around me. You see, you have to be careful not to neglect the importance of real face-to-face connection. and how vitally important that is. And for me, this community played an amazing role in moving me out of that state of hell, that state where I felt I wasn't good enough. Whether it was sitting down with a prayer chaplain to pray, or sitting with one of the ministers and getting advice from them and just sitting and talking to them. This community was here for me in a time when I wasn't able to see the heaven state that I knew I was living in. They were here ready to say, we'll stand there and see it for you until you can. I know this community was here for me, and I know it could be here for anyone else that needs it. That's what a community is. That's what this church is. We're here to support you in times when you need it. We're here to laugh and cry with you when you need it. That's what we're building here. That's what our church is. It was that way for me, and I know it will be that way for you. So don't ever discount the importance of having a community. And you know what? No matter how difficult those choices seem, how difficult it is to choose to see the good in a situation, to choose to see the blessings in a situation, I can tell you that there's never a situation where you don't have that choice. You see, Jeff, once again, in his usual annoying way, taught me this as well. It was a few years ago that Jeff had an accident. And it was a pretty serious accident. He fell about 60 feet from a tower. And you know, it's months and months of surgeries and physical therapy and rehab and doctors and time in the hospital. And he finally was able to go home. And so I went to visit him. And when I sat down, I asked him, Jeff, what were you thinking when the accident happened? And he said, you know what? As I was laying there on the ground, I realized I had two choices. I could choose to live, or I could choose to die. And I chose to live. And he went on to say that the paramedics were great, that as they loaded him into the ambulance, they kept saying, you're going to be just fine, you're going to be just fine. But he said when they wheeled me into the emergency room, I got a look at the faces of the doctors and the nurses, and it told me something different. The doctors and nurses didn't expect me to just be fine. They thought I was a dead man. And he said, I knew I had to take action in this moment. And so they're in the middle of the emergency room, and there's all the noise and the sound, and finally one of the nurses leaned over him and said, are you allergic to anything? And the entire room got quiet so they could hear his response. And Jeff said, I took a deep breath and thought for a moment and said, gravity. And he said it took them a while, given the seriousness of the situation, to realize what he had just said. And over the laughter, he said, no, but seriously, I'm choosing to live. And I want you to operate on me as if I'm alive, not dead. You see, Jeff taught me that life is all about choices. And when you cut away the clutter from life around you, every situation is a choice. You choose how to react. You choose how to respond to your friends. Your attitude is your choice. We all have choices. Our choices affect our reality. And when we choose to focus on the negative, when we choose to focus on the sorrow, when we choose to focus on the lack, we put ourselves into a hell state of mind. But when you choose to focus on the positive, when you choose to see the blessing in a situation, when you choose to learn from a failure, when you choose to grow from a sorrow, you've chosen heaven. See, never forget that life is about the choices that you make. So you can choose to live in a heaven state of mind, or you can choose to live in hell. The choice is yours. God bless you.